All right, so today we're diving into this excerpt
Yeah.
from Feeling the Vibration Frequency, the Law of Attraction Beyond the Secret.
Hmm.
And most people have at least heard of the Law
Yeah.
of Attraction, but this excerpt kind of takes it
Yep.
in a different direction and looks at the interplay of like positive and negative energies
It really does.
in a way that I thought was really fascinating.
Yeah, it challenges that whole like good vibes only thing, right? Like it
Yeah.
kind of argues that if you only focus on the positive,
Uh-huh.
you can actually end up strengthening the negative.
Yeah.
Like if you think about how a really bright light
Yeah.
makes an even darker shadow.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I never thought about it like that. But it makes sense when you think about how, like, if
Yeah.
you're trying to suppress, like, a negative emotion,
Uh-huh.
it always seems to just come back even stronger.
Totally. And that's where like the whole idea of repression
Right.
comes in, from a psychological standpoint. When we try to just like bury difficult emotions,
Yeah.
they don't just go away, they get pushed down into the subconscious.
Right.
And then they can like fester and affect us in ways that we don't even realize.
And the excerpt actually gives some really interesting
Da-da-da.
real-life examples of this.
Oh, yeah.
Like, it talks about how some spiritual teachers will end up with
Right.
partners who are, like, super negative.
Right.
And it's almost like one extreme is attracting
Yeah.
the opposite.
Yeah. And that kind of reminds me of that concept of duality.
Mm.
It's in a lot of different philosophies and traditions,
Yeah.
like the yin and yang symbol.
Right.
It's not that one is good and the other is bad. It's
Yeah.
that you need both for the whole picture.
So are you saying that, like, personal growth
Yeah.
actually comes from, like, confronting and integrating
Yes.
both the positive and the negative,
Exactly.
not just chasing after the good vibes?
Yeah, it's like if you were looking at a painting and you only looked at the light parts
Mhm.
and ignored all the shadows, you
Ah.
wouldn't really be seeing the whole thing.
Right. You need both to see the depth
Exactly.
and the meaning.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a great analogy.
Thanks.
So does that mean that, like, those people in our lives who we think of as negative
Mhm.
are actually, like, serving a purpose?
I think there's definitely something to that.
Okay.
Like maybe they're showing us the parts of ourselves that we're trying to ignore.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And speaking of, like, uncomfortable things,
Yeah.
the excerpt also looks at the idea of using positive thinking to heal from illness.
Yeah. And that's a tricky one.
Yeah.
Because while a positive mindset can definitely help,
Uh-huh.
this excerpt emphasizes the importance of actually addressing the root cause
Oh.
of the illness.
So it's not about pretending like it's not there.
Right.
It's about understanding the mind-body connection
Exactly.
and how our emotions can affect our physical health.
And our emotional patterns,
Right. And this reminds me of the story the author tells about
Yeah.
their mother
Uh-huh.
who recovered from a really serious illness.
Right.
But it wasn't just by, like, thinking happy thoughts.
Yeah.
She actually had to, like, confront and change some really ingrained patterns
Yes.
of self-criticism and self-blame.
It's amazing how powerful our minds can be
Right.
for both good and bad.
And that leads into another point the author makes,
Okay.
which is that our emotional states
Yeah.
are like waves. You can't stay on the crest forever.
Nope.
And if you try to resist the natural flow,
Right.
it just creates more struggle.
Yeah, it's like those social media posts,
The good vibes only
Yeah,
ones.
exactly. Like
Mhm.
life's not always sunshine and rainbows.
Right. So what's the alternative?
Well, it's not that we should just let our emotions control us. It's about learning to regulate them.
Okay.
Not by denying the negative feelings,
Yeah.
but by like navigating them skillfully.
So it's like learning to ride the waves, like a surfer.
Yes.
That's a great analogy.
So what about when we're really struggling?
Hmm.
Is it ever okay to try to shift to a more positive mindset?
That's a good question. And to be honest,
Yeah.
this excerpt has given me more questions than answers.
Me too.
It's like it's opened up a whole new way of looking at things.
It really has.
And we're just getting started because the excerpt goes on to talk about how even those negative thoughts and feelings
Yeah.
can actually offer us valuable insights.
If we're willing to listen to them.
So instead of pushing them away, maybe we need to, like, lean in a little bit.
It's a challenging idea, but the excerpt actually offers some practical ways
Okay.
to transform those negative patterns into positive change.
That sounds promising. Are you ready to dive into that?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Turn ahead.
Yeah, it's like those negative thoughts are trying to tell us something.
Like, you're trying to get our attention.
Exactly, like a friend who keeps bugging you about something.
Okay, so we should try to understand them instead of just shutting them down.
Yeah, the excerpt even compares it to like ending a ping pong match.
Mm.
If you don't return the ball,
Mhm.
the game stops.
Okay, that makes sense. But how do we actually do that?
Right.
Like the excerpt talks about cleaning up our emotional issues.
Yeah.
But what does that even mean, like in real life?
Well, I think it starts with just becoming more aware
Okay.
of our emotional triggers.
So, like, why do certain things set us off?
Yeah, and where do those reactions come from?
Okay, so like digging into our past.
Yeah, exactly. It might involve therapy or journaling or mindfulness.
Right, just anything that can help us understand
Yeah.
those deeper patterns.
And then once we've kind of identified those patterns,
Yeah.
we can start to challenge them.
But that can be hard.
It can be really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But the excerpt reminds us that we don't exist in a vacuum.
Right.
We're surrounded by people who reflect different aspects of ourselves.
Even the parts we don't like.
Exactly.
It's like you spot it, you got it.
Yeah, totally.
Right. The things we judge in others are often the things we're struggling with ourselves.
And the author actually tells a story about a friend who always seemed to find the negative in everything.
Oh, gosh. I think we all know someone like that.
Right. And it was like this friend was constantly triggering
Yeah.
the author's own tendency to be overly positive.
Interesting. So by observing their friend's negativity,
Yeah,
the author was actually able to see their own shadow side.
exactly. And once they recognized that pattern, they could start to shift it.
So it wasn't about changing the friend.
Nope.
It was about changing their own reaction.
Right. And it makes you wonder how many other negative people in our lives are actually helping us grow in some way.
That's a good question.
It is.
So let's shift gears a little bit
Okay.
and talk about manifesting wealth and abundance.
All right, because that's a big one.
Yeah, it's always a hot topic.
And this excerpt actually challenges the idea that we can just like think our way to riches.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's not just about visualizing piles of money
Okay.
and expecting them to magically appear.
Yeah.
There's this really interesting analogy in the excerpt
Who is it?
about a farmer who made a deal with God
Okay.
and asked for perfect weather all year round.
I'm listening.
So the farmer thought that would guarantee a great harvest.
Hey, that makes sense.
But when it came time to harvest, the wheat was empty. There were no seeds.
Oh, no.
The farmer was devastated.
So what happened?
Well, God explained to the farmer that the lack of challenges, the fact that there were no storms or hardships,
Yeah.
had actually weakened the wheat.
Oh, wow.
It needed those struggles to grow strong.
That's a great analogy.
It is, right?
So we need those difficult experiences.
We do.
To build character and resilience.
It's not about avoiding challenges.
Right.
It's about embracing them as opportunities to learn and grow.
And that applies to like everything.
It does.
Not just money.
To all areas of life.
So true abundance isn't about having a perfect life.
Right.
It's about learning to deal with the ups and downs.
Yeah.
With grace and resilience.
And that's what this excerpt is saying.
And it reminds me of what we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
About our emotional states being like waves. You can't stay on the crest forever.
You're going to have dips and troughs.
Right. So you have to learn how to ride those waves.
Like a surfer.
Exactly.
It's about not fighting against the current.
Okay, so I know we talked about this a little bit before.
Yeah.
But I want to dive a bit deeper into the excerpt's critique
Okay.
of using positive thinking for healing.
Oh, right.
Especially when it comes to serious illness.
I think that's really important to talk about.
Yeah.
Because there can be so much pressure to believe that we can just think ourselves healthy.
Right.
But it's more complicated than that.
Exactly. And while a positive mindset can help,
Of course.
we also have to acknowledge the reality
Yes.
of the illness.
And all the factors that contribute to it.
And the author actually shares a story about their own mother's experience with a serious illness.
Right. It's not just a feel-good story.
Yeah.
It really shows how important it is
Right.
to address those underlying emotional patterns.
So the author's mother was diagnosed with this rare blood disorder.
Right. And she was hospitalized.
And facing a very uncertain future.
And she had tried positive thinking.
Okay.
Visualizing herself as healthy, but it wasn't working.
So the author decided to try something different.
Yeah, they realized that their mother had this deep pattern of self-criticism and self-blame.
Like she was always putting herself down.
Yeah. And she felt responsible for everything.
Even things that were out of her control.
Exactly.
So the author encouraged their mother to become aware of this pattern.
Right, and to start challenging those negative beliefs.
And it wasn't about pretending everything was fine
No, it was about shifting her internal dialogue.
and releasing all that emotional baggage.
And it's amazing what happened. Her
Yeah.
condition started to improve dramatically.
Really, even though she was getting the same medical treatment.
Yeah, just from changing her mindset.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
It really shows the power
It does.
of the mind-body connection.
And it challenges us to go beyond that surface-level positive thinking
Right?
and really look at the root causes of our challenges.
Whether they're physical, emotional, or even relational.
It all comes back to embracing the full spectrum of life.
Right.
The light and the shadow, the good and the bad.
Yin and yang.
Exactly. It's not about denying the negative or forcing ourselves to be happy.
It's about understanding that both positive and negative experiences
Yes.
are part of what makes us human.
And that both can teach us something.
And like the excerpt says, our emotional states are like waves.
We can't expect to stay on the crest forever.
There will always be ups and downs.
So we have to learn how to ride those waves.
Like a surfer.
Exactly.
It's about surrendering to the process.
And not fighting against the current.
Which brings us to maybe the most challenging idea in this whole excerpt. The idea that even positive emotions can sometimes be a form of resistance.
Yeah. It sounds kind of backwards, right?
It does. We're always told that happiness is the goal.
That we should always be striving for it.
But this excerpt suggests that that constant striving
Yeah.
can actually block us
It's like we're afraid to let go of the good times.
because we know they won't last forever,
And then we end up resisting the natural flow of life.
which just creates more suffering.
Exactly.
So we need to find a way to detach from the outcome,
Yes. To be okay with whatever arises.
whether it's pleasant or unpleasant.
The excerpt uses a really beautiful phrase for this.
What is it?
Accepting the present moment is the best choice when we haven't developed enough wisdom to see that far.
Wow. That's really beautiful.
Yeah.
It's like we have to learn to trust the process.
Yeah, even when we don't know where it's going.
This whole conversation has really changed how I think about positive thinking.
Me too.
I used to think it was just about trying to be happy all the time.
Right, but this excerpt shows us that it's so much more than that.
Yeah, it's not about denying the negative.
Or pretending that everything's perfect.
It's about recognizing that both positive and negative experiences,
Are a part of life.
and that they both have something to teach us.
And it's about learning to navigate the ups and downs.
Like a surfer riding the waves.
Exactly. I love that analogy.
So where do we go from here?
Well, I think the first step is to start paying attention
Okay.
to your own emotional patterns.
Like, what are our triggers?
Yeah, and how do you usually react when those buttons get pushed?
And then once we know what those patterns are,
We can start to try different ways of responding.
so instead of getting caught in that negative loop,
Right.
maybe we can try taking a few deep breaths
Or just observing our thoughts and feelings without judgment.
and then choosing a more positive way to react.
And it's important to remember that we're not alone in this.
Right.
We all have our own shadows and our own baggage.
And sometimes those negative people in our lives
Are actually showing us parts of ourselves.
that we need to work on.
So instead of trying to change them,
Maybe we can see them as mirrors,
or teachers,
even if the lessons are hard.
this excerpt has so much wisdom in it.
It really does.
But ultimately, it's up to each of us to decide how to use it.
It's like a map.
But you still have to choose where you want to go.
And sometimes the most important thing is just to enjoy the ride.
That's a great way to put it.
And remember that quote we talked about.
Accepting the present moment is the best choice when we haven't developed enough wisdom to see that far.
That's such a powerful reminder to just let go and trust the process.
It is.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
We hope it's given you some things to think about.
And maybe even a new way to look at positive thinking.
Until next time.
See you then.